Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm proud to be able to rise on a question that I originally asked back in December about the Liberals' continued investment in the F-35 program. Although they promised in the last campaign, the Prime Minister promised that he wouldn't be buying the F-35. So just felt it kind of strange at that point in time why the Liberals would be investing in a program that they don't believe in. Well, we get down to the truth now, Mr. Speaker. Just yesterday, the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, a very well-respected independent think tank right here in Ottawa, came out with a new report called The Catastrophe, Assessing the Damage from Canada's Fighter Replacement Fiasco. This report is very condemning of the government on the way that they've handled this file in trying to find a replacement of our fighter jets. Now, I don't think I have to remind Canadians that the idea that the government has in actually replacing fighter jets is by replacing our CF-18s with even older, more wore-out F-18s from the Australian Air Force. And so they're taking possession of these used F-18s now. But let's be clear that the reason that we have this fiasco is that the Prime Minister made an ill-informed campaign promise in 2015 that he wouldn't buy the F-35. And that every move that they've made since then on replacing our aging CF-18 fighter fleet is about covering up for that promise, that they are going to have a heck of a time fulfilling, especially if they actually ran an open, fair, and transparent competition. Well, we know that this competition is not transparent because everybody's got lifetime gag orders on them, and we know it's not fair based upon this report, that it is fixed against some of the competitors in the potential competition. So it's clear that the Liberal government, that the Prime Minister himself, with the assistance of the Minister of National Defence, has placed the partisan interests of the Liberal Party of Canada ahead of our national interests as a nation in protecting our sovereignty. It has eroded the respect that we used to have on the world stage, and in particular, it's undermined our defense partnership with our strongest ally and neighbor, the United States. Now, throughout our time as government, we stood up for the Canadian Armed Forces. But morale within the Canadian Armed Forces is at the lowest levels we have ever seen. They're voting with their feet. Pilots and air crew, aircraft technicians are leaving in droves, all because they have lost confidence in the Liberal government. So we know that as a Conservative Party that we will go and select the right fighter jet in an expedited amount of time when we form government this fall. And we know that we will restore our relationships with our defense partners, especially the United States through NORAD. We will not waste billions of taxpayers' dollars on old fighter jets. We will not continue on with that Liberal tradition of buying used and old wore-out equipment as they have done in the past and they are doing right now. And we will make sure that we are the true North, strong and free.
The
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Defence. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank my colleague for his remarks. Mr. Speaker, I know my colleague likes to blame our government for all the ills of the world, but I'm just going to step back in time for the sake of Canadians tonight and remind him of the good things that we have done and the bad things that happened under the Harper government. As you know, our government has always been very clear. A modern fighter jet fleet is essential to defending Canada and Canadian sovereignty. And that's why we have launched an open and transparent competition to acquire 88 fighter jets and replace the aging CF-18 fleet. This is something the Conservatives could not get done in 10 years. This competition will ensure that we get the right aircraft at the right price while creating job opportunities for Canada's middle class and those working hard to join it. Now, let's go back in the past. The Harper Conservatives sole sourced almost every major military procurement and yet still failed to deliver for our military. What's their record? Well, here it is. The Parliamentary Budget Officer report stated that The estimate was almost double the government's estimate of the modern fighter purchase. A previous Auditor General report found the Conservatives keeping two sets of numbers, one internal and one for Canadians. And my colleague is on the moral high ground tonight. A decade later, still no future fighter for the Air Force. So I think rather than try and teach us a lesson, our colleague should look at what we're doing, look at the process we have, and acknowledge that our military members are happy that they finally have a government that cares about them. Our government is providing the Royal Canadian Air Force with the critical equipment it needs to be fully operational now and in the future. And that's why we're launching an open and transparent competition to purchase 88 new fighter jets. As you know, Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives only aimed to buy 66, but they couldn't deliver one in 10 years. In the meantime, Canada continues to be a member of the Joint Strike Fighter Program, which will allow companies in Canada to secure $1.5 billion in contracts and give us the option to buy aircraft through the program should the F-35 be successful in the competitive process for the future fleet. Earlier this fall, another Auditor General's report confirmed what Canadians have always known, that the Harper Conservatives mismanaged the Jets file and misled Canadians for more than a decade. This report also confirms the existence of a capability gap, which started under the Harper Conservatives once again. So unlike them, we will not compromise our ability to meet our NATO and NORAD commitments. And that's exactly why we've been working with Australia to purchase fighter aircraft to bolster our fleet until the permanent replacement for our CF-18s is operational. As you know, they've arrived. Soon more are forthcoming. And we have had to do this because of the lack of action and the fiascos under the Conservative government. We are going to make sure that the Canadian Air Force has what it needs and the planes that it needs to continue its military operations.
Lake Eastman.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to take any lessons from these Liberals. You know, the PBO report that came out this spring actually showed that the Australian fighter jet program is actually going to cost us 22% more. Because why? The Liberals are running two sets of books. The report that just came out from Macdonald-Laurier Institute actually has a redacted copy of the original Auditor General's report from last fall that recommended that national defense should not purchase interim aircraft. It's right there. They took it out. More condemnation. And they talk that they are part of the Joint Strike Fighter Program when there's two letters from the Pentagon and the U.S. Department of Defense saying that jobs are at risk here in Canada because Canada hasn't been following the rules under the Memorandum of Understanding between all 9 partner nations. Already, 900 direct jobs have been created, $1.35 billion in benefits from the Joint Strike Fighter Program, 9,000 indirect jobs, and the Liberals are going to squander it all for partisan purposes and not in Canada's national interest.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. I know that the truth is hard to hear for my colleague, but we launched an open and transparent competition in order to replace the jets, not 66, 88. And this is something, as I've already pointed out, that the Conservatives could not get done in 10 years. Their record is of 2 Auditor General reports stating that the Harper Conservatives mismanaged the file for over a decade without obtaining new fighter jets for our Air Force. So imagine, we're talking about transparency, 2 numbers, 2 sets of numbers, one for the public and one internal. I don't think you can talk about I don't think we can talk about transparency on the part of the Conservatives. Because of the competition we launched, we'll get the right aircraft at the right price while creating job opportunities for Canada's middle class. And I think that the members of the Canadian military are very pleased with our record.